The wagon lurched to a stop in the middle of nowhere, and Zelda Bryant knew her uncle had finally found a way to be rid of her. She sat in the back of the covered wagon, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying not to show fear as her Uncle Horace spoke in hushed tones with a stranger on horseback. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, golden grass rippling like an ocean under the brutal August sun of 1873. They had left Independence 3 days ago, supposedly heading west to join a wagon train, but now Horace was negotiating something, and the sick feeling in Zelda's stomach told her she was the bargaining chip. "She can cook and clean," Horace said loudly enough for her to hear. "Strong girl, 20 years old, healthy as a horse. Worth more than passage for 2 wagons, I'd say." The stranger, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, circled his horse around the wagon to get a better look at her. Zelda lifted her chin, refusing to cower, even as humiliation burned through her veins. After her parents died of cholera last winter, Horace had taken her in with his wife Martha, but she had always been a burden to them, another mouth to feed when they had 6 children of their own. "She got papers?" the stranger asked. "Free woman, if that's what you mean," Horace replied. "No husband, no debts, clean slate." The stranger nodded slowly. "Wagon master's been looking for extra help. We got a family that needs a woman to help with the young ones, and the cook could use someone. Tell you what, you sign her over to the wagon train's custody, and I will get your wagons attached to our train for half price. Captain Quincy Walters will make the final call on what happens to her, but he is a fair man." Zelda's breath caught. Sign her over. Like she was property, like she was livestock. She wanted to scream, to protest, but what choice did she have? If Horace left her here on the prairie, she would die within days. At least with a wagon train heading west, she had a chance at survival, even if it meant indentured servitude or worse. "Deal," Horace said, spitting into his palm and shaking the stranger's hand. The stranger rode ahead, and Horace climbed back onto the wagon seat without looking at her. His wife Martha finally turned around, her weathered face showing something that might have been guilt. "It's for the best, Zelda," Martha said quietly. "Out west, a woman like you can make a fresh start, maybe find a husband, have your own family. Here, you would just be a burden to us forever." Zelda bit back the sharp retort on her tongue. These people had taken her in, fed her, given her shelter. They did not owe her anything more, even if their solution was to trade her away like a sack of flour. The wagon train came into view an hour later. A long line of white-topped wagons circled up for the midday rest. There must have been 40 wagons, maybe more, with livestock grazing nearby and children running between the wheels while their mothers prepared meals over small fires. The stranger led them to the largest wagon at the center of the circle, where a man stood studying a map spread across a makeshift table. Captain Quincy Walters was not what Zelda expected. She had pictured someone old and weathered like the stranger, but this man could not have been more than 25, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore a simple work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, dusty trousers and worn boots, but there was an air of quiet authority about him that made even the grizzled stranger straighten up in his saddle. "Captain, got those 2 wagons I mentioned," the stranger said. "This here's Horace Bryant and his family. The girl is the one I told you about." Quincy looked up from his map, his gray eyes moving from Horace to the wagon, where Zelda still sat frozen in place. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, and she saw something flicker across his face, too quick to identify. "Step down, please, miss," Quincy said, his voice low and even. Zelda climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from days of travel. She smoothed her faded calico dress and met Quincy's eyes directly, refusing to look away first. If she was being sold, she would at least maintain her dignity. "What's your name?" Quincy asked. "Zelda Bryant." "How old are you, Miss Bryant?" 20, sir." "And you understand the arrangement your uncle has proposed?" Heat flooded her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "He has traded me for passage west. I understand that I am to work for whoever needs help on this wagon train." Something dark crossed Quincy's face. He turned to Horace, who had climbed down from the wagon seat. "Is that how you see it, Mr. Bryant? Trading your niece like she is a commodity?" Horace bristled. "Now see here, I am providing the girl with opportunity. She has got no prospects back in Independence, no money, no family except us. Out west, she can make something of herself. I am doing her a favor." "A favor would be paying for her passage yourself," Quincy said coldly. "What you are doing is abandoning your responsibility and trying to make it sound noble." The stranger shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Captain, I told them we needed help. The Johnsons need someone for their little ones, and Mrs. Patterson needs help with the cooking. Seemed like it could work out for everyone." Quincy was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Finally, he looked back at Zelda. "Miss Bryant, do you have any money of your own?" "No, sir. Just the clothes I am wearing and a small bag of personal items." "Do you want to go west?" The question surprised her. No one had asked what she wanted in months, maybe years. "I do not have anywhere else to go," she said honestly. "So yes, I suppose west is as good a direction as any." Quincy nodded slowly. "Here is what is going to happen. Mr. Bryant, you will pay the full price for your 2 wagons to join this train. I do not accept human beings as currency. Miss Bryant will travel with us as well, and she will work to earn her passage same as everyone else works. She will help where needed, but she is not owned by anyone, and she will be treated with respect. When we reach Oregon, she will be free to go wherever she chooses. Are we clear?" Horace's face turned red. "Now hold on, I do not have the full price. That is why I made this arrangement. Then I suggest you sell one of your wagons or some of your goods to raise the funds," Quincy replied. "We leave tomorrow at dawn. If you are not paid up by then, you will not be joining us." The stranger cleared his throat. "Captain, that seems a mite harsh. I gave my word." "You gave your word on an arrangement I did not approve," Quincy said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I am wagon master of this train, and I will not have it said that we trade in human lives. Miss Bryant will work for her passage, but she will do so as a free woman with her dignity intact." Zelda felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. This stranger, this wagon master, was standing up for her when her own blood had cast her aside. She did not know what to make of it. Horace sputtered and argued, but Quincy was immovable. Finally, Martha climbed down and put her hand on her husband's arm. "We can sell the second wagon, Horace. We do not need 2. We will make do." Horace looked like he wanted to argue more, but the steel in Quincy's eyes must have convinced him. He gave a jerky nod and climbed back onto his wagon, driving it away to the edge of the circle without another word to Zelda. The stranger tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Zelda standing alone with Quincy Walters. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sounds of the wagon train around them, children laughing, women chatting, the lowing of oxen. "Thank you," Zelda finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Quincy's expression softened. "No need to thank me for basic decency. Come on, I will introduce you to Mrs. Patterson. She runs the main cook wagon, feeds anyone who does not have the means to cook for themselves. You will help her, and in return you will get meals and a safe place to sleep. She has got a spare bedroll in her wagon." Zelda followed him through the circle of wagons, acutely aware of the curious stares from the other travelers. News traveled fast in a wagon train, and she had no doubt everyone would soon know about the girl who had been traded for passage. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. She looked Zelda up and down and gave a satisfied nod. "You know your way around a kitchen, girl?" "Yes, madam. I have been cooking since I was old enough to reach the stove." "Good. I have been feeding 60 people 3 times a day, and my back is not what it used to be. You help me with the work, and I will make sure you are fed and have a safe place to rest your head. Captain Walters here will make sure nobody bothers you. Isn't that right, Captain?" "That's right," Quincy said. "Miss Bryant is under the protection of this wagon train. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "The captain here is a good man, even if he is young for the job. His father was wagon master before him, taught him everything he knows before the fever took him last year. You are in good hands, dear." Quincy's jaw tightened at the mention of his father, and Zelda saw grief flash across his face before he masked it. "I will leave you to get settled, Miss Bryant. We pull out at dawn. Get some rest." He walked away before she could thank him again, his long strides carrying him back toward the center of the camp. Zelda watched him go, this unexpected defender who had appeared out of nowhere to save her from humiliation. "Do not mind his gruff ways, Mrs. Patterson said, following her gaze. "He has had the weight of the world on his shoulders since his father passed. Leading a wagon train west is not easy, especially when you are barely old enough to shave. But he is good at it, better than some men twice his age. Now come on, let me show you where you will be sleeping." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Patterson put Zelda to work immediately, teaching her the routine of feeding a wagon train. They made a simple supper of beans and cornbread, serving it to a steady stream of travelers who paid a few cents for the meal or bartered goods if they had no cash. Zelda worked until her arms ached, but it felt good to be useful, to have a purpose beyond being a burden. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Zelda found herself watching Quincy Walters move through the camp. He stopped at nearly every wagon, checking on families, settling disputes, making sure everyone was prepared for the next day's travel. He moved with quiet confidence, never raising his voice but somehow commanding respect from everyone around him. "He is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, appearing beside Zelda with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Zelda. "Lost his mother when he was just a boy, grew up on wagon trains with his father. This life is all he knows. Some of the men grumbled when he took over as wagon master, said he was too young, but he proved himself quick enough. Fair but firm, that is Quincy Walters." "Why did he stand up for me?" Zelda asked. "He does not know me. I could be a terrible worker or cause nothing but trouble." Mrs. Patterson chuckled. "Because it was the right thing to do, and Quincy Walters always does what is right, even when it is not easy. Besides, I think he knows what it feels like to be alone in the world. After his father died, he had nobody. This wagon train became his family." Zelda sipped her coffee, letting the bitter warmth spread through her. For the first time since her parents died, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life out west. Maybe this wagon master who stood up for strangers would show her that not all men were like her uncle, willing to trade away family for convenience. The next morning, Zelda woke before dawn to help Mrs. Patterson prepare breakfast. The camp was already stirring, families packing up their belongings and hitching their oxen to the wagons. The air was cool and fresh, and the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Quincy rode through the camp on a handsome bay horse. "Pull out in 30 minutes, he called. "Make sure your water barrels are full and your teams are ready. It is going to be a long day." Zelda watched him ride past, noting the easy way he sat in the saddle, like he was born there. When he caught her looking, he tipped his hat slightly, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks before she quickly turned back to her work. The wagon train moved out precisely at dawn, a long line of white-topped wagons stretching across the prairie. Mrs. Patterson's wagon was near the middle of the train, and Zelda walked alongside it, grateful to stretch her legs after days of sitting in her uncle's wagon. The rhythm of travel quickly became familiar. Walk until midday, rest during the hottest hours, then walk again until evening. Quincy rode up and down the length of the train constantly, checking on everyone, helping with broken wheels or stubborn oxen, scouting ahead for water and good camping spots. Zelda found herself watching for him, noticing the way he always had a kind word for the children or a patient ear for the worried mothers. 3 days into the journey, a wheel broke on one of the wagons near the front of the train. Zelda was helping Mrs. Patterson prepare the midday meal when she heard the commotion. Quincy was already there, his horse ground tied nearby, his shirt soaked with sweat as he helped the family's father lift the wagon to replace the wheel. "Miss Bryant," Mrs. Patterson said, "take some water up to the captain and the Jenkins family. They will be parched." Zelda filled a canteen and walked up the line of wagons, trying to ignore the curious looks from other travelers. When she reached the broken wagon, Quincy was on his back underneath it, his muscles straining as he held the axle up while Mr. Jenkins worked to slide the new wheel into place. "Water, sir," Zelda said quietly. "Just set it down, please," Quincy grunted. "Almost got it." There was a loud clunk as the wheel slid into place, and Quincy rolled out from under the wagon, his face and shirt covered in dust and grease. He stood up, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, which only succeeded in spreading more dirt across his face. Zelda found herself smiling despite everything, and when Quincy noticed, one corner of his mouth quirked up. "Guess I look pretty rough, huh?" he said. "You look like someone who works hard to take care of people," she replied, handing him the canteen. He took it, their fingers brushing for just a moment, and something electric passed between them. Quincy held her gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary before taking a long drink of water. "Thank you," he said. "How are you settling in? Mrs. Patterson treating you well? She is wonderful." "I feel useful for the first time in a long while. Good." He handed the canteen back to her. "If you need anything or if anyone gives you trouble, you come find me. I meant what I said about you being under this train's protection." "I know. Thank you, Captain Walters." "Quincy," he said. "You can call me Quincy." "Then you should call me Zelda." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less burdened. "All right, Zelda, I better get back to work. These wagons will not drive themselves." As the days turned into weeks, Zelda fell into the rhythm of wagon train life. She worked alongside Mrs. Patterson from before dawn until after dark, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, helping with sick children. The work was endless and exhausting, but it felt good to be needed, to have a place in this moving community. And through it all, she found herself increasingly aware of Quincy Walters. He was everywhere, always working, always taking care of someone. She noticed how he gave his own food to families running low on supplies, how he stayed up late into the night standing guard so others could sleep safely, how he never asked anyone to do something he would not do himself. She also noticed how he found small excuses to stop by Mrs. Patterson's wagon. He would check if they needed anything, or share information about the trail ahead, or simply accept a cup of coffee and a few minutes of conversation. And increasingly, his attention seemed to focus on Zelda. "You are making quite an impression on our young captain, Mrs. Patterson said one evening after Quincy had left. They were washing dishes from supper, and the older woman had a knowing gleam in her eye. "I do not know what you mean," Zelda said, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. "Oh, I think you do. That boy finds more reasons to stop by here than a bee finds flowers, and I have noticed you watching for him too." Zelda felt her cheeks warm. "He is just being kind, making sure I am settling in properly. Hum. Keep telling yourself that, dear." That night, as Zelda lay in her bedroll under Mrs. Patterson's wagon, she stared up at the stars and admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was falling for Quincy Walters. His strength, his kindness, his unwavering sense of right and wrong. Everything about him drew her in, made her want to know more, to be near him. But what did she have to offer a man like that? She was penniless, without family, traded away like property. He was the wagon master, responsible for dozens of families, carrying on his father's legacy. She was foolish to even dream that he might see her as anything more than a responsibility, another person under his protection. The next day brought trouble in the form of a river crossing. The Arkansas River was running high from summer rains, and the current was treacherous. Quincy rode back and forth along the bank, studying the water, his face grim. "We will cross one wagon at a time," he announced. "Unhitch your teams and swim them across, then we will float the wagons over using ropes. Everyone stays calm and follows my instructions exactly. I will go first to show you it can be done safely." Zelda stood with Mrs. Patterson, watching as Quincy stripped off his boots and shirt, leaving him in just his trousers. Even from a distance, she could see the lean muscle of his back and shoulders as he waded into the river leading his horse. The current caught him almost immediately, pulling him downstream, but he was a strong swimmer and made it across with his horse, emerging on the far bank dripping and waving to show it was possible. The process was slow and nerve-wracking. One by one, the wagons were floated across, their contents wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry. Quincy stayed in the water for hours, helping guide each wagon, making sure no one panicked and drowned. By the time it was Mrs. Patterson's wagon's turn, Zelda could see he was exhausted, his movements slower, his face pale. "I am going across with the wagon," Zelda told Mrs. Patterson. "Someone needs to make sure the supplies stay balanced." "That is dangerous, child. Let the captain handle it. He has been in that water for hours. He is exhausted. I can help." Before Mrs. Patterson could argue further, Zelda climbed into the wagon. Quincy appeared at the back, water streaming from his hair and body. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. "Get out. This is not safe." "You have been working yourself to death all day," Zelda replied. "I am light enough that I will not make much difference, and I can keep the supplies from shifting and unbalancing the wagon." "Zelda, no, I cannot risk it. You do not get to decide what risks I take," she said firmly. "Now let us get this wagon across before we lose daylight." For a moment, she thought he would physically remove her from the wagon. His jaw was tight, his eyes stormy. But then he gave a sharp nod. "Stay in the center. If the wagon starts to tip, jump clear and swim for the far bank." "Do you understand?" "I understand." The crossing was terrifying. The current caught the wagon immediately, spinning it sideways. Zelda clung to the wooden support beams, feeling the wagon buck and sway beneath her like a living thing. Through it all, she could hear Quincy's voice, calm and steady, directing the men on the ropes, telling her to shift her weight to counterbalance the wagon. They were halfway across when a rope snapped. The wagon lurched violently, and Zelda lost her grip, tumbling toward the open back of the wagon and the churning water beyond. Strong hands caught her wrist at the last second, and she looked up to find Quincy had climbed into the wagon with her, holding her with one hand while gripping a support beam with the other. "I have got you," he said, his voice rough. "I have got you." The wagon steadied as new ropes were attached, and they made it to the far bank without further incident. As soon as the wagon touched solid ground, Quincy climbed down and then turned to help Zelda out. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood there, his hands still on her waist, her hands on his shoulders, both of them soaked and shaking. "You scared me," he said quietly, his face inches from hers. "I have never been so scared in my life." "I am sorry," she whispered. "I just wanted to help. I know. You are the bravest woman I have ever met." His thumb brushed her ribcage through her wet dress, sending shivers through her that had nothing to do with the cold water. "And the most stubborn." "Takes one to know one," she said, trying for lightness even as her heart pounded. He smiled, but it faded quickly. "Zelda, we should not. I am the wagon master. You are in my care. It would not be right." "What would not be right?" "This. The way I cannot stop thinking about you. The way I find excuses to see you every day. The way I want to." He stopped, shaking his head. "You deserve better than someone who lives his whole life on the trail, who has nothing to offer but a horse and a bedroll." Zelda reached up, cupping his face with her hand, feeling the roughness of his stubble against her palm. "Maybe you should let me decide what I deserve." For a heartbeat, he leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. Then he stepped back, removing her hand gently from his face. "It is not that simple. I have responsibilities. You are just starting your new life. You should not tie yourself to someone like me before you have even seen what the West has to offer." He walked away before she could respond, moving to help the next wagon across. Zelda stood on the bank, water dripping from her dress, and felt something crack in her chest. He cared for her. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in his touch. But he was too honorable to pursue it, too convinced that he had nothing to offer. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her with a blanket. "Stubborn men," she muttered, wrapping the blanket around Zelda's shoulders. "They think they know what is best for everyone." "He is just trying to do the right thing," Zelda said, watching Quincy wade back into the river. "Sometimes the right thing and the smart thing are not the same. That boy has been alone too long. He has forgotten that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone in." That night, as the camp settled down after the exhausting day, Zelda could not sleep. She kept replaying the moment in the river, the fear in Quincy's eyes when he thought she might fall, the way his hands had trembled as he held her. He cared for her. She knew he did. But he was too bound by duty and honor to admit it. She was about to drift off when she heard raised voices from the edge of camp. Grabbing a shawl, she slipped out from under the wagon and followed the sound. A group of men had gathered near one of the wagons, and in the center of them was Quincy. Facing down a large, angry-looking man Zelda recognized as Thomas Hanson, one of the families who had joined the train in Independence. "I paid good money for passage, and I expect to be treated with respect," Hanson was saying, his voice loud and slurred. He had been drinking. "You are too young to be giving orders, boy. Your father would be ashamed of how you run things." Zelda saw Quincy's shoulders tighten, but his voice remained calm. "Mr. Hanson, you are drunk. Go sleep it off, and we will forget this conversation happened." "I will not be dismissed by some kid playing wagon master," Hanson snarled. He took a swing at Quincy, who stepped aside easily, catching Hanson's arm and twisting it behind his back in one smooth motion. "I said go sleep it off," Quincy repeated, his voice harder now. "I do not want to have to tie you up, but I will if you cannot control yourself. You and what army?" Hanson spat. "This one," said a voice, and Zelda turned to see that half the men in camp had gathered, forming a silent wall of support behind Quincy. Mr. Jenkins, whose wagon Quincy had fixed, stepped forward. "The captain has earned our respect 10 times over. You will give him the same, or you will find yourself walking to Oregon alone." Hanson looked around at the stern faces and seemed to deflate. Quincy released him, and he stumbled away to his wagon, muttering under his breath. "Thank you," Quincy said to the assembled men. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." The men dispersed, and Zelda started to slip away, but Quincy's voice stopped her. "I know you are there, Zelda. You might as well come out." She stepped into the firelight, pulling her shawl tighter. "Are you all right?" "Fine. Just another drunk with a grudge." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking tired. "What are you doing up?" "I could not sleep. I heard the commotion." "You should not be out here alone at night." "I am not alone. You are here." He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. "Zelda, I meant what I said earlier. We cannot. I cannot what? Cannot care about me. Too late. Cannot want me. I think that ship has sailed too, based on how you look at me." She took a step closer. "Or cannot allow yourself to be happy because you think you do not deserve it." "You do not understand," he said roughly. "This life, leading a wagon train, it is all I know how to do. I have no land, no home, no prospects beyond the next journey. What kind of future is that to offer someone?" "A future with you, and it sounds pretty good to me," she said simply. He stared at her, and she saw the moment his control cracked. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You should want more than me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I want exactly you," she whispered. "Just you, Quincy Walters. That is all I have wanted since the moment you stood up for me when no one else would." He kissed her then, and it was everything she had dreamed and more. His lips were gentle at first, questioning, and she answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, became urgent, and she felt the careful control he always maintained slip away. This was Quincy without the walls, without the responsibility, just a man who wanted a woman and finally allowed himself to have her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am probably going to be terrible at this," he said. "I have never had anyone before, not like this. I do not know how to be someone's man." "Then we will figure it out together," she said, smiling, "because I have never had anyone either." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and she felt the tension drain out of his body. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other under the stars, and Zelda felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She felt like she was home. Over the following weeks, Zelda and Quincy found ways to steal moments together despite his demanding schedule. He would stop by Mrs. Patterson's wagon for coffee and conversation. She would walk beside his horse during the day's travel, and they would talk about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on wagon trains, about the father he had loved and lost, about his dreams of someday having land of his own, but never quite believing it could happen. She told him about her parents, about the happy childhood before the cholera, about feeling lost and alone in her uncle's house. "When we get to Oregon," Quincy said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset, "I will have enough money saved to buy some land. Nothing big, just a small ranch enough for some cattle and horses. Would you want that? A simple life on a ranch?" Zelda took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I would want any life as long as it is with you." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. "Marry me, Zelda. I know it is fast, and I know I do not have much to offer right now, but I love you. I have loved you since that first day when you stood there with your chin up, refusing to be broken. Marry me, and when we get to Oregon, I will build us a home. I will give you everything I have." Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and when he pulled back, he was smiling wider than she had ever seen. "We will have the ceremony when we reach Fort Laramie. There is a chaplain there. We are about 2 weeks out. That will give us time to, Captain. The shout came from the edge of camp, urgent and alarmed. Captain Walters, we have got riders coming in fast. Quincy was on his feet immediately, his hand going to the gun at his hip. Zelda stood too, her heart racing. Riders appearing at night was never good news. A group of 5 men thundered into camp on exhausted horses, and Zelda recognized the man in the lead as one of the scouts Quincy had sent ahead that morning. His face was grim as he slid from his horse. "Trouble, Captain," the scout said. "There is a band of maybe 20 men holed up about 10 miles ahead. They have got a family's wagon surrounded, been firing at them all day. Looks like they are waiting for nightfall to move in." Quincy's face went hard. "Outlaws. That would be my guess. The family must have had something worth stealing. How many guns do they have?" "Looked like 2, maybe 3 shooters. A man, his wife, and maybe an older boy." Zelda watched as Quincy's mind worked, weighing options. "Get 10 men together," he said finally. "Volunteers only, and they need to be good shots. We leave in 15 minutes. "Quincy, no," Zelda said, grabbing his arm. 20 against 10, that is suicide." He covered her hand with his. "I cannot leave those people to die. It is not who I am." "Then I am coming with you." "Absolutely not." "I can shoot," she said. "My father taught me. You need every gun you can get." "Zelda, please, I cannot risk you. If something happened to you," his voice broke slightly. "And I am supposed to just wait here while you ride into danger, not knowing if you will come back." She held his gaze. "We are in this together now, remember. That goes for the dangerous parts too." For a moment she thought he would argue, but then he pulled her close and kissed her hard. "Stay near me. Do exactly what I say. Promise me." "I promise." The rescue party rode out into the darkness, and Zelda had never been so scared in her life. She rode Mrs. Patterson's horse, a placid mare that seemed unfazed by the urgency. Quincy stayed close to her, checking on her constantly as they covered the miles to where the family was under siege. They could hear the gunfire before they saw the camp. Quincy held up his hand and the group stopped. He dismounted and moved forward on foot, and Zelda followed against his whispered protests. From the cover of a small rise, they could see the scene below. A single wagon sat in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by men on horseback. Muzzle flashes came from under the wagon, where the family had taken cover. The outlaws were taking turns riding close and firing, clearly trying to wear down the defenders before moving in. "Here is what we are going to do," Quincy said quietly to his group. "We split up, half on each side. When I give the signal, we all fire together. Aim for the horses, not the men. We want them scattered and on foot. Then we close in fast and get that family out of there." Questions? There were none. These were good men, farmers and families heading west, but they knew how to handle guns and they trusted their wagon master. Zelda found herself positioned next to Quincy, her rifle heavy in her hands. "You do not have to do this," Quincy whispered to her one last time. "Yes, I do. Those could have been my parents in that wagon. It could be us someday. We help people. That is what good people do." He looked at her with such love and pride that her breath caught. Then he turned his attention back to the outlaws below. The signal was a gunshot, and suddenly the night exploded with sound. Zelda fired at the nearest horse, saw it rear and throw its rider. All around the clearing, horses were panicking, men were shouting, and Quincy's group was moving in fast. The outlaws, caught by surprise and suddenly without their mounts, scattered into the darkness. Quincy reached the wagon first, calling out to identify himself. A man crawled out from under the wagon, his face bloody but his eyes fierce. "Thank God, I thought we were done for." "How many of you?" Quincy asked. "Me, my wife, and our 2 boys. We are heading to Oregon, got separated from our original train a week back. Those men jumped us this morning, wanted our horses and supplies. Can you travel? Yes, we are all walking wounded but alive. Good, hitch up your team. You are coming back with us. We have safety in numbers. The rescued family's wagon joined the train that night, and Zelda helped Mrs. Patterson tend to their wounds. The wife, a woman named Sarah, clutched Zelda's hand and wept with gratitude. I thought my boys would be orphans by morning, she said. Your captain is a hero. Zelda looked over to where Quincy stood talking to the rescued father, already focused on the next problem, the next family to protect. Yes, she said softly. He is. But when they finally had a moment alone, well after midnight, Quincy pulled Zelda into his arms and buried his face in her hair. She could feel him trembling. I was so scared, he admitted. Not for me, but for you. When I saw you out there with a gun, facing down those men, I have never been so terrified and so proud at the same time. We are all right, she soothed, running her hands up and down his back. We are both all right. I cannot lose you, he said fiercely. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Zelda Bryant. The thought of losing you, you will not lose me, she promised. I am tougher than I look, remember. He pulled back to look at her, and even in the dim light she could see the intensity in his eyes. 2 weeks until Fort Laramie. Then you will be Zelda Walters, and nothing will ever separate us. Those 2 weeks felt like the longest of Zelda's life, even as they flew by. The wagon train made good time across the plains, following the Platte River toward the Rocky Mountains. Each day brought them closer to Fort Laramie, closer to the moment when she would become Quincy's wife. The other travelers had figured out the situation, and to Zelda's surprise, most of them seemed genuinely happy for the couple. Mrs. Patterson was planning a celebration for after the ceremony, and the other women were helping Zelda piece together a proper wedding dress from scraps of fabric and lace they had saved. Even Horace and Martha approached her one evening, looking uncomfortable but determined. We heard you are marrying the captain, Horace said gruffly. We wanted to say we are happy for you, and we are sorry for how we treated you back in Independence. Martha nodded, tears in her eyes. You deserved better from us. We let fear and poverty make us cruel. Can you forgive us? Zelda looked at her aunt and uncle and felt the anger she had carried for so long begin to fade. They had done wrong, but they were trying to make it right, and she was too happy to hold on to bitterness. I forgive you, she said simply. And thank you for bringing me out here, even if it was not your intention. If you had not, I never would have met Quincy. Fort Laramie appeared on the horizon on a bright August morning, the wooden walls and buildings a welcome sight after weeks on the open prairie. The wagon train pulled in, and Quincy immediately went to arrange for resupply and to find the chaplain. The wedding took place the next afternoon in the fort's small chapel. Zelda wore the dress the women had made, simple but beautiful, with wildflowers in her hair that the children had gathered. Quincy wore his best shirt, his hair freshly trimmed, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him. The chaplain, an older man with kind eyes, performed a simple ceremony. But when Quincy slipped a ring onto Zelda's finger, a simple gold band he had traded his best saddle for, she felt the significance of the moment deep in her soul. This man, this good, honorable man, was choosing her, choosing to build a life with her, giving her not just his name but his future, his dreams, his whole heart. I love you, he whispered after they kissed, his forehead resting against hers. I will love you until the day I die, Zelda Walters. And I love you, she whispered back. You gave me the West and your name, but more than that, you gave me a home. You are my home, Quincy. The celebration afterward was joyful and loud, with music and dancing and more food than Zelda had seen in months. Mrs. Patterson wept happy tears and took credit for bringing them together. The rescued family toasted to the wagon master and his bride. Even the gruff Mr. Jenkins got misty-eyed as he watched the young couple dance. That night, in the small room Quincy had rented at the fort for privacy, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Zelda had been nervous, both of them being innocent in such matters, but Quincy was patient and gentle, and they learned together how to bring each other pleasure. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Zelda felt a peace she had never known. This was where she belonged. Not in independence, not in her uncle's house, but here with this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "What are you thinking?" Quincy asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I am thinking about how strange life is. 2 months ago, I thought I would spend the rest of my life as a burden to my uncle and aunt. And now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, heading to Oregon to start a ranch, planning a whole new life. Any regrets?" She lifted her head to look at him. "Not a single one. You," he kissed her softly. "My only regret is not finding you sooner. But we have the rest of our lives now. That is what matters." The wagon train left Fort Laramie 3 days later, continuing west through increasingly rough terrain. The easy plains gave way to rocky hills and the looming presence of the Rocky Mountains. The travel became harder, the days longer, but Zelda found joy in it all because she faced it beside Quincy. She still helped Mrs. Patterson with the cooking, though the older woman now insisted on calling her Mrs. Walters with a proud smile. But Zelda also spent more time with Quincy, learning about wagon master duties, helping him plan routes and manage the complex logistics of moving 100 people across a continent. "You are good at this," Quincy told her one evening as they studied maps by firelight. "You have a mind for planning and organization. When we get our ranch, you are going to be the one who keeps us from going broke." "When we get our ranch," Zelda repeated, loving the sound of those words. "Tell me again what it will be like." He pulled her close, and she settled against his chest as he painted pictures with words. "We will find a valley with good water and grass. Build a cabin first, just something simple to start. Then we will get some cattle, maybe a few horses to breed. You will have a garden and we will plant some fruit trees. In a few years we will have built something real, something lasting. And maybe by then we will have started a family too." "How many children do you want?" she asked. "I do not know. As many as God sees fit to give us, I suppose. I grew up alone, so the idea of a big family sounds pretty good to me. What about you?" "I want our house to be full of noise and laughter and love," Zelda said. "I want our children to grow up knowing they are wanted, knowing they have a place where they belong." "They will," Quincy promised, kissing the top of her head. "I will make sure of it." The crossing of the Rocky Mountains was the hardest part of the journey. The wagons struggled up steep mountain passes, sometimes having to be double-teamed or even dismantled and carried. The weather turned cold at the higher elevations, and one night it actually snowed, even though it was still August. Zelda worked alongside everyone else, pushing wagons, helping to calm frightened children, cooking meals over smoky fires when wood was scarce. She saw Quincy work himself to exhaustion day after day, always at the front when they needed to climb, always at the back when someone fell behind. One particularly difficult morning, as they attempted a narrow mountain pass, one of the wagons slipped and nearly went over the edge. Quincy somehow managed to catch the wagon and hold it while the team was unhitched, but the effort left him white-faced and shaking. That night, Zelda tended to his bruised and battered body, her hands gentle as she rubbed salve into his shoulders and back. "You do too much," she said quietly. "You will work yourself to death." "These people depend on me," he replied. "I cannot let them down. They depend on you being alive and healthy too. What good are you to anyone if you destroy yourself?" He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. I know you are right. But I cannot help it. It is how my father raised me. The wagon master always puts everyone else first. And who takes care of the wagon master? You do," he said, pulling her down into his arms. "You take care of me, Zelda Walters. You are what keeps me going." They crested the highest pass 3 days later, and suddenly Oregon lay before them, a vast green land of forests and rivers stretching to the western horizon. The whole wagon train stopped, and people climbed down from their wagons to stare in wonder at the promised land. Quincy rode back to where Zelda stood, dismounting and wrapping his arms around her from behind. Together they looked out at their future. "There it is," he said softly. "Oregon, our new home." "It is beautiful," Zelda breathed. "Even more beautiful than I imagined." The final weeks of the journey felt almost joyful compared to the mountain crossing. The wagons rolled down into the fertile valleys of Oregon, past rivers full of salmon and forests full of game. Families began to break off from the main train as they found the land they wanted to claim, until the once great wagon train had dwindled to just a handful of wagons. Quincy led them to the Willamette Valley, where the land was rich and green, perfect for farming and ranching. He had been here once before with his father and knew the area well. When they reached the small settlement of Riverton, Oregon, nothing more than a trading post and a few cabins, Quincy pulled the wagons to a stop. "This is as far as I go," he told the remaining families. "There is good land all through this valley. Find your spot, file your claims, build your homes. You made it. You are here." There were tears and thanks and promises to stay in touch. Mrs. Patterson hugged both Quincy and Zelda tight. "You two are going to do just fine," she said. "You were made for each other and made for this land. I will be settled about 10 miles north if you ever need anything." As the last wagon rolled away, Zelda and Quincy stood alone on the trail with their horse and the few possessions they had accumulated. Zelda looked at her husband and started to laugh. "What is so funny?" he asked, smiling. "We made it. We actually made it. All those miles, all those dangers, and here we are, together." He kissed her there in the middle of the trail, deep and passionate and full of promise. "Now the real work begins," he said. "We have got to find our land, build our home, start our ranch. Are you ready?" "I have been ready since the day I met you," she replied. They found their valley 2 days later, a perfect bowl of green grass with a creek running through it and forest on the surrounding hills. Quincy filed the claim at the land office in Riverton, and just like that, they were landowners. The first months were brutally hard. They lived in a tent while they built their cabin, working from dawn until dark to cut and haul logs, notch them together, build a roof. Quincy had some experience from watching cabins go up at various forts and settlements, but he was no expert. They made mistakes and had to rebuild sections, but slowly, steadily, their home took shape. Zelda proved to be just as capable as Quincy. She wielded an axe to strip bark from logs, helped him lift the heavy beams into place, chinked the gaps between logs with mud and grass. Her hands blistered and bled, her body ached, but she never complained. This was their dream, and she would work as hard as necessary to make it real. By the time the first snow fell in November, they had a solid cabin with a good fireplace, a small barn for the 2 horses and 3 milk cows they had bought in Riverton, and enough firewood stacked to last the winter. It was not much, but it was theirs. On their first night sleeping in the cabin, Zelda stood in the doorway looking out at the snow-covered valley. Quincy came up behind her, wrapping a blanket around both of them. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about how far I have come. Last winter I was sick with grief over my parents, living in my uncle's house feeling like a burden. And now look at me. I have a home, a husband I love more than life itself, and a future full of possibilities. You gave me just as much, Quincy said. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. Leading wagon trains, taking care of everyone else, but never letting anyone take care of me. You taught me it is okay to need someone, to love someone, to build a life instead of just surviving. She turned in his arms to face him. I love you, Quincy Walters. Thank you for giving me the West in your name. The West was always going to be here, he said, but I am honored you wanted my name, and I am even more honored to have your love. That winter was hard but happy. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they had each other, and that was enough. Quincy taught Zelda to play chess with a set carved from wood scraps. She taught him songs her mother had sung to her as a child. They talked about their dreams for the ranch, for the family they hoped to have, for the life they were building together. By spring, Zelda knew she was pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Quincy, wanting to give him the news in a special way. On the first truly warm day of April, she packed a picnic and convinced him to take a break from clearing land for their first pasture. They sat by the creek, eating bread and cheese and dried apples, watching the water sparkle in the sunlight. Finally, Zelda took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. There is someone else living in our cabin now, she said softly. Someone very small who will not make an appearance until about October, but they are here. We are going to be parents, Quincy. For a moment, he just stared at her, his hand still on her belly. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every animal within a mile. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. A baby, he kept saying. We are having a baby. Zelda, we are having a baby. Are you happy? She asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. Happy does not even begin to cover it, he said, kissing her soundly. You have given me everything, Zelda Walters. Everything I never knew I wanted. The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Quincy was terrified, hovering over her constantly, until she finally had to tell him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time and she would be fine. But he refused to let her do any heavy work, taking on extra himself to make up for it. He brought her wildflowers to cheer her up when she felt poorly. He rubbed her feet when they swelled. He talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child about the ranch they were building, the animals they would have, the adventures they would share. By summer, Zelda was feeling better and insisting on helping with the work again. They acquired more cattle, building their herd slowly but steadily. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing news from the scattered settlement and helping Zelda prepare for the baby's arrival. You are going to be a wonderful mother, Mrs. Patterson told her one afternoon as they sewed tiny clothes together. That baby is lucky to have parents who love each other the way you and Quincy do. I am scared, Zelda admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if I do not know what to do? Every new mother is scared, Mrs. Patterson said gently. But you are strong, and Quincy will be right there with you. You will figure it out together, just like you have figured out everything else. The baby came on a crisp October evening, arriving faster than anyone expected. Quincy had ridden to Riverton to fetch the midwife, but the baby was not willing to wait. Mrs. Patterson, who had been visiting for the day, ended up delivering the child with Quincy's help after he returned to find labor already advanced. It was a boy, perfect and healthy, with a powerful set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. Quincy held his son for the first time with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. He is perfect, Quincy whispered. He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" "I was thinking Thomas," Zelda said, exhausted but happy. "After my father, Thomas Walters." "Thomas Walters," Quincy repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son." Those first months with a newborn were exhausting. Thomas was a hungry baby, demanding to be fed constantly. He did not sleep much, which meant neither did Zelda or Quincy. But even through the exhaustion, they found joy in watching their son grow and change, in the way his eyes began to focus on their faces, in his first real smile. Quincy was a devoted father, taking on even more of the ranch work so Zelda could rest when the baby napped. He would walk the cabin floor for hours with Thomas when the baby was fussy, singing off key lullabies and telling stories about the journey west. "You are going to grow up on this land," Quincy would tell his son. "You will never know what it is like to be rootless, to wander. This is your home, Thomas, your legacy, and someday you will help me build it into something even greater." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew too. Quincy proved to be a skilled cattleman, and their herd thrived in the rich Oregon grassland. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavy work, and slowly, year by year, they built the dream they had talked about that first night in their cabin. When Thomas was 2, Zelda became pregnant again. This time, it was a girl, born on a warm June morning with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determined chin. They named her Sarah, after the woman they had rescued on the trail west. 2 children, Quincy marveled as he held his daughter while Thomas toddled around their feet. 2 healthy, beautiful children, a successful ranch and the love of my life by my side. How did I get so lucky? "Luck had nothing to do with it," Zelda replied, watching her family with a full heart. "You worked hard. You were kind. You stood up for what was right. This is not luck, Quincy. This is what you earned." The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father with the cattle. Sarah was wild and fearless, always getting into mischief. They added 2 more children to the family, a boy they named Matthew, and another girl they named Grace. The ranch prospered, growing from a small operation to one of the most successful in the valley. Quincy's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread, and people came from all over to buy his cattle. But he never forgot where he came from, often taking on young men with no prospects and teaching them the ranching trade, giving them the same chance at a new life that Oregon had given him. Zelda ran the business side of the ranch, keeping the books, managing the sales, planning for the future. She had a sharp mind for numbers and an even sharper instinct for when to buy and when to sell. Together, she and Quincy made a formidable team. As their children grew, Zelda and Quincy made sure they knew the story of how their parents met. They told them about the wagon train, about how their mother had been traded for passage west, and how their father had stood up for her, given her his name and a future. "The most important lesson you can learn," Quincy told his children, "is that people matter more than anything else. More than money, more than property, more than pride. When you see someone in need, you help them. When you see injustice, you stand against it. That is what it means to be a Walters." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quincy surprised Zelda with a trip to town. They left the children with Mrs. Patterson, who was now a beloved grandmother figure to the whole family, and spent the night at the small hotel in Riverton. Over dinner, Quincy pulled out a small box. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a wagon. "I had it made special," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "To remember where we started. You were traded for passage west, but you became so much more. You became my partner, my love, the mother of my children, the heart of our home." This wagon represents the journey we took together and how it brought us to everything we have now." Zelda touched the pendant, tears in her eyes. "I would not change a single moment," she said. "Even the hard parts, even the scary parts. Because all of it led me to you, to this life, to our family. You gave me the West in your name, but more than that, you gave me purpose and love and a place to belong." "We gave that to each other," Quincy corrected gently. "I was lost before I found you, Zelda. You saved me just as much as I saved you." They made love that night with the passion and tenderness of long practice, knowing exactly how to bring each other pleasure, their bodies familiar but never boring. Afterward, lying in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely, Zelda felt profound gratitude for the strange path her life had taken. If Horace had not traded her to that wagon train, she never would have met Quincy. If Quincy had been less honorable, less kind, he might have let the arrangement stand. But instead, he had seen her as a person deserving of dignity and respect, and that simple act of decency had changed both their lives forever. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a young man and took over more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication and fairness his father had demonstrated. Sarah surprised everyone by developing a talent for horse training, turning that side of the ranch into a profitable enterprise. Matthew became the family scholar, eventually going back east for education before returning to Oregon as a lawyer. Grace, the youngest, had her mother's head for business and her father's compassion, finding ways to help the growing community around Riverton. Through it all, Quincy and Zelda remained the foundation of the family, their love for each other as strong as ever. They grew older together, gray threading through their hair, lines appearing on their faces, but their partnership never wavered. On a warm summer evening when Quincy was 50 and Zelda was 45, they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The original cabin was now just one room of a much larger house. The barn had been rebuilt twice, each time bigger. The pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with healthy cattle bearing the Walters brand. Their children were all grown now, Thomas married with children of his own, Sarah engaged to a neighboring rancher's son, Matthew practicing law in Portland, and Grace running a mercantile in Riverton with a skill that made her parents proud. "We did all right, did we not?" Quincy said, taking Zelda's hand in his. "We did better than all right," Zelda replied. "We built something real and lasting. We raised 4 good children who know how to work hard and treat people right. We created a legacy." "Do you ever think about that day on the Kansas prairie?" he asked. "When your uncle tried to trade you away?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But not with anger anymore, just with wonder at how strangely life works. If that had not happened, I never would have met you. Our children would not exist. None of this would exist. So in a strange way, I am grateful it happened the way it did." Quincy pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I am grateful too, grateful for every day I have had with you, every challenge we faced together, every joy we shared. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Walters." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," she replied. "The cowboy who gave me the West and his name, and so much more than I ever dreamed possible." They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence of two people who had weathered life's storms together and come out stronger. Around them, the ranch they had built hummed with quiet life. Cattle lowed in the distance. A coyote called from the hills. The wind whispered through the grass. This was their legacy, built from nothing but hard work, love, and unwavering dedication to each other. From a desperate girl being traded away and a young wagon master with nothing but his honor, they had created an empire of the heart. And when, Years later, they were laid to rest side by side on a hill overlooking the valley they had claimed together. Their children and grandchildren gathered to remember them, not as historical figures or successful ranchers, though they were both, but as two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life based on love, respect, and partnership. Thomas, now an old man himself, stood at his parents' graves with his own children and grandchildren around him. "Your grandmother was traded for passage west," he told the younger generation. "And your grandfather gave her the West and his name, but more importantly, they gave each other everything. They taught us that where you start does not matter. What matters is what you do with the chances you are given and who you choose to build your life with. That is the legacy of Quincy and Zelda Walters. That is what we must never forget." The words carried on the wind across the valley, past the ranch house and the barns, across the pastures and the creek, settling into the land itself. The story of two people who had beaten the odds, who had turned hardship into hope, who had proved that love and honor could build something that would last for generations. And high on the hill, if you looked closely at Zelda's headstone, you could see a small carving of a wagon next to her name, a reminder of the journey that had brought her west and the cowboy, who had given her everything she never knew she needed. The story ended not with tragedy or loss, but with a love that had lasted a lifetime and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. It was a fitting end to a story that had begun with a desperate trade on the Kansas prairie and ended with a dynasty built on love, hard work, and the unshakable bond between two souls who had found their home in each other.